Now, the first is balance. Now, balance is the visual weight of elements in a composition. There are three types of balances. We have symmetrical, we have asymmetrical, and we have radial. Now, beside this, you see that here is a pictorial example of what I'm talking about. So, symmetrical, you understand that um, when you're looking at your design, there's some form of balance between this section of your design and this other section of your design. If you're looking at this, you notice that if you're having an image by one side of your design, you have text at the other side of your design. Of course, you notice that the text and the balance of the text and the balance of the image, they are actually directly proportional to each other. All right, which is different from asymmetrical. Asymmetrical, you realize that one has more dominance than the other, and then for radial, you realize that it kind of like has some type of radial balance. All right, so for example, if you're creative or whatever it is you're working on, or a document or a design is having some type of radial pattern, ensure that while it's radial, it should have some more radial balance, and that is a typical example of what I'm talking about here. The next is contrast, and please understand that we're talking about the principles of design. Okay, now contrast refers to um, the arrangement of opposite elements, such as light versus dark colors, rough versus smooth textures, um, large versus small shapes in a piece, so as to create a visual interest, excitement, or drama. So essentially, what it's talking about is your ability to be able to merge and arrange light and dark colors together smoothly. They shouldn't fight each other. You don't want to also have um, you know color combinations that just looking at the design, your eyes, you don't even know where to go to, if it's the date, if it's the theme, if it's just scattered everywhere. And it's not just for colors, also applying to rough and smooth textures. We talked about textures earlier on. Are you having a rough texture? Are you having a smooth texture? Have some form of contrast. All right, it shouldn't look too now, for example, look at contrast in shape. Now, this is contrast in shape, right? You have a square and you have a circle, right? Now, contrast in shape, you're talking about the gray color circle and the gray color um, the gray color circle and the green color square. Now, contrast in size is, you see how you have your big size, so it's not just scattered. You're not just having irregular shapes flying here and there. And this is also contrast in layout. Now, repetition is so important. It's so important. A lot of the time, you always do this. Now, repetition is simply the number of times the element of the design is replicated. I can replicate a circle many times. My circle, I can use my circle to highlight the theme. I can use my circle to highlight the dates. I can use my circle to highlight a logo. I can replicate many times in my design. All right, now I have rhythm. Now, rhythm is achieved when reoccurring positions, size, color, and use of design elements has a focal point interruption. Now, a large percent of the time, you want to understand that you look at some designs, there's some form of rhythm going on in the design. Now, if you look at this, I'm using a shape to create some type of focal point, all right? And this is what we call a rhythm here, all right? A recurring positioning or position of size, color, and the use of elements to form that has a focal point interruption. And then we want to look at dominance. Now, this is so powerful. Dominance is a blend of contrast, emphasizing relative or varied visual weights. So a large percent of the time, something usually would always have dominance, but you want to blend it in. All right. We don't want to just notice that part of the design alone. It has to blend in with other parts of the design. Whatever it is that you want to have dominance should not at the end of the day become a distraction in your design. Okay, and then you have proportion. So proportion refers to the relative size and scale of various elements in your design. Now, there are different, proportion. You have proportion by by size. You have proportion by ratio. Proportion by size is, you have, of course, you see this chart here. This is a typical example of proportion by size. You see that all the various um, shapes, they are different from each other. You have this one is longer, this is a bit shorter, but this is what you call proportion by size. Now, proportion by ratio is, just looking at this side by side. right? You see there's one compartment and then there's another compartment. All right, you realize that what you have in one compartment is different from what you have in the other compartment. So this is what you call proportion by ratio. Now we have typography. Now listen very well. Typography is one of the most important parts of your design. I tell you the honest truth. Now, typography in itself largely affects how your design looks. Typography is the art and technique of rearranging types of type to make writing language legible, readable, appealing. When displayed, simply put, typography is the style or appearance of text. It's not just that now. How your design largely looks is affected by the type of fonts you use, and you must understand the psychology of fonts when it comes to designing. You cannot erode that or put that under the carpet. You must understand this effectively. Now, we're going to look at the anatomy of typography. In typography, a standard set of terms is used to describe the parts of a character. These terms and the parts of the letters they represent are often referred to as typeface anatomy. Let me explain. Now, if you notice here, this is a typical font. Now, this area of the font is called your serif. Excuse me, this area is called your stem. Here is called your tail, particularly if you have letters like Y, and then you have here like in. So essentially, this doesn't necessarily apply to when you're doing design. You can have a look at this document eventually um, when you have access to it. You can also understand, you just need to understand that this doesn't necessarily need to, you're not going to be having this written in your actual design or your designs. But it's important for you to understand that you don't just throw fonts anyhow. Know why you're using the font. I want this part of the font to speak to something. For example, when I do designs, I ensure that my font is communicating something. What the kind of font I'm going to use for a wedding invitation is not the kind of font I'm going to use for in maybe a church flyer, or maybe some type of magazine, or some type of, you see, you must understand that fonts vary, particularly when fonts vary from occasion to occasion, all right. So common fonts, you have serif fonts, you have sans serif fonts, you have display fonts. These are fonts that you can download on Google. They are very popular fonts, popular serif fonts. Now this popular serif fonts, so there are fonts that fall under the category of serif fonts, and these include Copper Black, Palatino, and New Times Romance. Now you also have sans serif fonts, and they include Area Black, Impact, and the list goes on. Now you also have popular display fonts. Like, they are display fonts, which is quite different from sans serif and serif fonts. Now you have your Alora, you have Mojave, and the rest of them. Now, when choosing a font, your message determines the font you use. Like I said earlier on, your message determines the fonts you use. If you are passing a communication, an official communication, an official documental, an official document, right? Maybe from the presidency, or maybe from your office, you can't be using the kind of fonts you typically use for party, or for so it has to, you must understand, that's why I say you must understand the psychology of fonts. And how do you do this? You have to expose your mind to what people are doing out there. So fonts have their own language, and they all have something to say beyond words on the page. They can come across as casual, neutral, exotic, and graphical. You have graphical fonts, you have exotic fonts, you have casual fonts, and then you have neutral fonts. So it's now left for you to know which you're using for your design. And then you have combination of fonts. Look, listen, I promise you, you get this right, you're becoming a fantastic designer. When designing a font to use, less is more. Opposite attract. The same is true for fonts. Feel free to combine font styles that are different but complementary, like sans serif and serif. Now, I want you to look at this. You see this fantastic color combination, font combination. It's kind of like exactly what I'm talking about. And you're not just looking at this, right? You're comparing it with things like platforms like Pinterest, platforms like Dribble. You're complementing fonts together, and that's where you have color combination. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is other key terms, which is important when it comes to graphics designing. Now, other key terms include kerning. Kerning is a space between specific characters. Unlikely tracking, it varies over the course of the words because each letter fits together differently. So I want to explain this for you so you can understand. Now, kerning is a space between specific characters, right? Um, I know I've mentioned, and I'm going to say it again, that space is very, very important. Now, um, this is not just even having maybe an image and then giving space before you have your text, right? If you have a circle, you want to give space before you have something. So kerning is the space in between specific characters. Unlikely tracking, it varies over the course of the word between each letter fits together different. So it's important that you understand that. So leading refers to the rhythm between the wording. It's almost like that. It's a space in between lines of text, also known as line spacing. I'm sure you already know that. You know a bit of line spacing, so it's synonymous to leading. Now, tracking is the overall space between characters. The overall space between characters, sometimes called character spacing. And I'm sure you probably understand what I'm saying. Character spacing. Most programs let you condense or expand this depending on your need. So a large percent of the time, you want to ensure you employ character spacing. So just to give you an idea of what these things mean, their official names, tracking. Now, hierarchy is so important. Hierarchy is used to guide the reader's eyes. For example, you're looking at this slide right now. Other key terms, hierarchy. Other key terms. When we're talking about kerning, we didn't make kerning as big as other key terms. That hierarchy there. Hierarchy, big, small, 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 small. And then if you look under here, you're seeing think, create, deliver. So you have big, small, 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 small. What that is doing is it's helping your eyes to read this document effectively. Hierarchy is used to guide the reader's eyes to whatever is most important. In other words, it shows them where to begin and where to go next using different levels of emphasis. All right. Now, color. Color is so vital. Now, I said this before that color is now I'm not going to flog it so much because I mentioned about it earlier on. I'm going to talk about color theory for a second. Color theory is both the science and the art of color. It explains how humans perceive color, how we mix color, we match or clash colors together. Now, color essentially communicates a message, and I mentioned that at the earlier part of this video. Color wheel. Now, color wheel is a visual representation of colors. You see this sometimes in your tools that you're using for design, arranging according to a chromatic relationship. That's how they usually arrange them. Now, you have types of colors. Of course, you know primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. And then primary colors are colors that cannot be created through mixing of other colors. And the secondary colors are colors that are produced by mixing any two primary colors together. Tertiary colors are colors tertiary colors are a combination of primary and secondary colors together. Now you have warm colors. Now warm colors evoke warmth because they remind us of things like the sun or fire. You have cool colors. Cool colors evoke a cool feeling because they remind us of things like the sky or the grass. So you need to understand that this thing communicates. So colors, they communicate. So you don't just throw colors around. And then you have other scheme of colors. You have chromatic, monochromatic, you have complementary, you have triadic colors, you have analogous colors, split complementary colors, and tetradic colors. And these are typical examples of what I just mentioned. You have monochromatic, analogous here, complementary, split complementary, you have triadic, and you have tetradic colors. Now, this is so important and so vital. Layout and compositions. Now, what is layout and composition? Now, listen to me very clearly. Layout and composition are the building blocks of design. They give your work structure and they make it easier to navigate from the margin on the side to the content in between. You must be a good designer that knows how to give layout and composition to your work. And I'm going to throw more light to that. It is the way your content is basically arranged. That's the summary of layout. How you arrange your content is what you call layout. It shouldn't be scattered. Now, this is a typical example of layout For example, it doesn't matter if you're working with text, images, or elements in a graphic. Without a thoughtful, well composed layout, your work would basically fall apart. If you're creating an ID card, put ID card there. You make it very it's a beautiful layout, and an example of what I'm talking about. All right, and then we have 5 basic layout principles. We have um, proximity, we have alignment, we have hierarchy, we have white space, we have contrast, we have repetition. Okay, now proximity is all about using visual space to show relationships in your content in practice. It's pretty simple. All you have to do is to make sure related items are grouped together. For instance, block of text or elements in a graphic, right? So related items, for example, you have all the text in one place here. You have all the shapes in one place. And then you have all the elements, all the characters in one place. That's what proximity is basically talking about. Now, white spacing. Now, inside of this particular same layout, the white spacing in between is what we're talking about when it comes to white spaces. So this is white spacing is an important part of every composition. It doesn't mean literal white space. It just means negative space. And we'll talk about positive and negative space, right? At the beginning. Like the spaces between your content, between lines, and even the outer margins, the spaces around the content, the spaces around your shapes, the spaces around your text, spaces around your characters. All right. And then you have alignment. Alignment is so important. Alignment is the placement of text. Your work cannot be see. You can't have Smith Adams engineer, and then you now have the characters coming outside. No, make everything aligned. If you're going to have shapes, they should be well aligned. They should be on the same line, on a straight line. Make it neat, make it aligned. They have to. This is the alignment is the placement of objects or text to the margin. You have both right, left, top, bottom alignment, and all of that. Now, I want to talk about contrast when it comes to layout. Now, you must understand that contrast simply means that one item is different from another. In layout and composition, contrast can help you do many things like catch the reader's eye, create emphasis, or call attention to something important. So, for example, if I want the name to be more pronounced, I can either make it big, make it more emphasized, right? But it shouldn't distract other elements. Notice when I was talking about contrast, I said a bit of that. It shouldn't distract other elements. You're going to have your shape or your characters. Just ensure that there's some form of, you don't want to have, if you're going to have shape, you want to ensure that you want to stick to maybe 2 types of shape maximum, or particularly you want to stick with one form of shape, either circle or rectangle, but essentially ensure that you are able to help people read detail or read the things you want their eyes to pick effectively. And then we're going to hierarchy. Of course, you know hierarchy already. Hierarchy is also closely tied to contrast, which is a visual technique that helps the viewer navigate your work. In other words, it shows them where to begin and where to go using different levels of emphasis. So you have your now, for example, if I look at this, I know where the name is. It's straightforward. I know where shapes are. I know where characters are. So that's kind of like how hierarchy relates to layout. Now, repetition is so important, and you can see it here. Right? Repetition is a reminder that every project should have a consistent look and feel. This means finding ways to reinforce your design by repeating, or echoing certain elements. For example, you have shape. How many shapes do I have here? I have 4 shapes. All right. Now, repetition is just I just duplicated the first 2 and I brought them down. All right. Smith Adam, and you have engineer. I just duplicated text twice and I changed the font of the one below and I reduced the size. So it's still repetition. And these are different types of layers, in terms of, based on all the things we talked about. All right. And a large percent of the time, you either see this on a brochure, on a blueprint, an architectural drawing, or some type of sewing pattern. All right. I'm sure you learned a lot in this particular class. I cannot wait for you to share your experience and grow from the materials that you'll be learning from on the next class. Thank you, guys.